Welcome everyone to the 2021 Australian Gender Economics Workshop Policy Symposium, Educating the Next Generation of Economists. My name is Rebecca Cassells and I am the chair of the AGU 2021 Organising Committee and I'm Deputy Director of the Bankwest Curtin Economics Centre at Curtin University. I'd like us to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the lands from which we are meeting on today from around the world, both across Australia as well, and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So today I am on the land of the Wudjuk people, the Noongar Nation here in Perth, Western Australia. Well, economists influence and make all sorts of important decisions. They are often in positions of power as head of central banks and central revenue agencies, government departments and major corporations and think tanks. They're also at the coalface of developing and implementing major public policies that impact entire populations, like where governments spend money, who and what to tax and how, whether interest rates are raised or lowered, trade and regulation policy, education and employment policy, healthcare, climate policy, the list is pretty extensive. But the discipline does have its fair share of problems and diversity is one, especially in senior leadership roles. Women, people of colour, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are all underrepresented in the economics profession. And this happens really across the globe. The way in which people are treated in the profession is another problem that's been highlighted, and sexism and racism, both overt and more clandestine, have been ongoing problems in the profession. What's being taught and how economics is being taught in the classroom is another issue. There have been criticisms of economics being too focused on maths and proofs and lacking focus on the real world issues and problems that it should be helping solve. So it is, I think, encouraging to see how much attention has been paid recently, both to uncovering and discussing, but also finding ways to address these problems. Standards have been introduced to improve behaviour. Several interventions have been tested or are actually currently underway to increase diversity. And we're having open conversations about the content of the economics curriculum and the way in which economics is being taught. These conversations are happening. This means that we're not only on our way to making economics better as a profession, but we're also on our way to helping make sure the decisions that economists are involved in will improve. And this is a really good path for us to be on. So today we're going to talk about the problems, but we're also going to focus more on what we can actually do about them. We have an incredible panel of experts that we'll be hearing from soon, sharing their insights and experience on these issues, but also what they see as the solutions. So we will be joined by Allison Boothen, who is Professor of Economics at the Australian National University. Alison is a world-leading labour economist and is also a Distinguished Fellow of the Australian Economic Society. Wendy, Carlin, Professor of Economics at University College London, will also join us from Oxford. Wendy leads the International Core Project, a program designed to reform the undergraduate economics curriculum, and it's been taken up by so many universities and students across the globe. Dr. Leonora Risse, Senior Economics Lecturer at RMIT University in Melbourne and Chair of the Australian Women in Economics Network, which has the overarching objective of increasing representation of women in economics. And Justin Wolfers, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at the University of Michigan, also joins us. Justin has been a vocal advocate of creating a more inclusive and respectful economics profession and in developing more engaging and accessible economics content. To kick things off, we will now hear from Catie Bradbear, Senior Inquiry Manager at the Productivity Commission, and Harry Greenwell, Senior Advisor at the Behavioural Economics Unit of the Australian Government, on one initiative that has the potential to encourage more young women to study economics. Over to you, Harry and Catie.
Hi everyone, my name is Catie Bradbear, as Beck mentioned, and I'm a member of the ACT Women in Economics Network Committee, and I also work at the Productivity Commission here in Canberra. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today to present the findings from a randomised controlled trial of mentoring of female economics students at the Australian National University. And before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge the support of the Women in Economics Network for the program. Also, Harry and the rest of the Behavioural Economics team in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, as well as the Research School of Economics at the ANU. As Beck touched upon in her introduction, greater representation of women in economics has the potential to improve the quality of decision making and the broader commentary around key issues that affect our community. Yet, as Beck also mentioned, here in Australia, there continue to be fewer women in senior roles of economic agencies, in senior roles at university faculties, and also in the media. So just one cog in this complex machine that Harry and I are going to be talking a bit about today is the number of women who are graduating from economics degrees. Yet here again, it's not a good news story. There's been a decline in the number overall and also the proportion of women studying economics in Australian universities, noting that actually the number of males has also declined. So women are less likely to enrol in economics degrees. And in addition, as this slide shows, administrative data from ANU indicates that women are also not seeing out their degrees through to graduation. As shown in the slide, the proportion of women declines over the course of their degree. And we see this same trend in the other years that we have data for. So what is it about economics that is turning women off? Well, I suspect that our panelists today will have a number of insights into this, and I really look forward to hearing them. But my read of the literature indicates a range of possible theories. So I'll briefly go through these. The first one is a lack of female role models, with female students unable to observe someone with similar characteristics who's accomplished in their field. Another one is that women do not actually relate to what they're studying. For example, they may be deterred by highly theoretical subject matter, they may hold divergent views on the material in the curriculum, or they may not be able to see themselves in the case studies presented in textbooks. A further theory is that economics career paths are not well understood. There may be a perception, for example, that economics leads to a career in finance or banking, and that the work is not societally meaningful. There may also be misperceptions about their academic performance, including their maths aptitude, and there may be a perception that the class environment and indeed the work environment is chilly, hostile, or overly competitive. And these factors were supported by a number of conversations that we had with a focus group of female economics students at ANU. So I'll talk a little bit now about the mentoring program that we established. So mentoring is obviously just one approach amongst many, but it was the approach that we chose to attempt to address some of these experiences for female students at ANU. The overall aim of the program was to inspire students to continue with economics and ultimately to pursue a career in economics. But we broke this down a little bit more and sought to achieve this large aim by providing students with a role model, so making a degree and or career in economics seem more tangible. We sought to provide them with a broader perspective on career options for economics graduates, making an economics degree more attractive. And we also wanted to provide an insight into the practical applications of economics, helping to make economic studies more interesting and relevant to them. The program ran for 1 year. This was over semester 2, 2018 and semester 1, 2019. We targeted students enrolled in Microeconomics 1 and Microeconomics 2. And the thinking behind this was that it's a critical decision point for students at which they consider whether to continue studying economics, to switch into economics if they're doing an introductory micro course as part of another degree, or to in fact drop out of it. And targeting these subjects meant that we ended up having a diverse range of applicants as shown. So domestic, international, some who were enrolled in economics, others who were enrolled in other degrees. We received before I get on to that, the students completed as part of the application process a short survey, but this was really just an opportunity for us to collect information on them. It didn't actually affect the success or otherwise of their application. And Harry's going to talk a little bit more about this survey and the others that we conducted throughout the program. But all up, we received 88 applications and we randomly selected 55 of these applicants into the program. And you might ask why we chose 55. Well, that was because we had 55 mentors. And we approached our mentors through our networks. Being a government town, it's perhaps not surprising that just over half of the mentors, 55%, that we recruited were from the government sector. You'll see here a little snippet from our website. We made short biographical descriptions of the mentors available on our website, and this enabled prospective mentees to browse through the mentors' profiles and express a preference for the mentor. We knew that this matching process, matching up the mentor and the mentee, was going to be a really crucial factor in the success or otherwise of the program. So enabling the mentees to look at the mentors enabled us to match up students with a mentor according to their preferences. Where we weren't able to match a student to their preferred mentor, we looked to match by other means. So, for example, the sector that the student was interested in, or even in some cases, mutual interests. So mentors and students were encouraged to hold at least 4 meetings during the year, but we found that around half the participants had less meetings than this, as you can see on the next slide. We provided the mentors and the mentees with guidance material, but otherwise it was left to the participants to really make their own arrangements to meet and to set out the topics of conversation based on individual preferences. And Harry's going to talk a little bit more about the success or otherwise of that shortly. In addition to the matched mentors and mentees, we ran 3 networking events over the course of the program. 2 of these were panel Q&A type events, and 1 was a speed mentoring event. And the aim of these events was to bring participants together for further networking and to provide the students with insights beyond what their own mentor might be able to provide. And again, Harry's going to talk about this in just a moment. And I will now pass over to Harry to talk about the RCT and the results.
So much, Catie. So let me just briefly talk about the evaluation design before I get into the results. There were really 2 components to the design. The first one was the randomised control trial itself, and the other aspect was the surveys that we ran alongside it. We pre-registered the randomised trial on the American Economic Association registry site, and perhaps in a fit of overkill, we also registered on the Open Science Framework site. And I should say that the results that we're about to talk through are available in a report that we released yesterday that's on our website. So the key aspects of the RCT, as Catie said, it was a relatively small sample size, and so we acknowledge in our pre-analysis plan that we didn't have a high level of statistical power for the sort of effect sizes we were expecting to detect, but we were constrained by the number of applicants we received for the program, so we just did the best that we could. We had 55 mentors, so that determined our split in the allocation between treatment and control. And we used 2 outcome measures. Remember that ultimately we were interested in whether people would pursue a career in economics and whether they would complete an economics degree. As a short-term indicator of that, we looked at what they did in the following semester and whether they enrolled in one of the core economic units, which would be a prerequisite for completing an economics major and an economics degree. For the following year, we created a bit of a hybrid measure. Some students, some later year students had completed their degree by that stage. And so if they complete an economics degree, we captured those. For those who were still studying, we looked at their economics enrolment again. I'll just acknowledge that that second measure, the one for 2020, was a little bit different from what was in our pre-analysis plan. Fiddling around with outcome variables is sometimes a signal of p-hacking. I'll let you judge whether you think that that's what we've done, but we tried to be pretty transparent about why we adopted these outcome variables in our report, and also about other tests that we ran along the way. So we also ran a series of surveys, as Catie mentioned, one at baseline with all students when they applied. We did a midline survey just of students in the mentoring program to ask them about its implementation. Then we followed up with all students and with the mentors as well at the end line. The response rates weren't high enough to do a treatment versus control comparison, but we did still learn quite a lot from those surveys, and I'll touch on that in just a minute. But to begin with, I want to turn to the main RCT results, and we start with semester 2 2019. So all of these students were enrolled in a core economics unit when they enrolled in this. They were enrolled in a microeconomics unit. By semester 2 of 2019, in the control group, we had 33% who were enrolled in a core unit compared to our mentoring program with 46%. So a pretty substantial average treatment effect of 12.9 percentage points. However, on a one-sided test, this was it gave a p-value of 0.11, so a null result, but perhaps a large effect size if in fact that is reflective of the true effect of the program. We went on and had a look at 2020. By this stage, there are fewer students continuing with economics in general. So in both the control group and the mentoring group, the numbers are down, and that was as expected. But again, there's a marked gap between the two groups. 18% of the control group had either completed an economics degree or continued with core economics subjects, compared to 33% in the mentoring program. So roughly similar average treatment effect, this time a slightly larger, 14.8 percentage points, and still a null result against the sort of conventional threshold of 0.05. So taken alone, we would have to be cautious about how far we took these results. There are some possibly large effect sizes, but according to the standard tests, both null results. So then we look to the other data that we collected. We asked students, the first question at the top there really goes to the impact of the program. We asked them if they agreed that it was more likely that they would pursue a job in economics due to their participation in the mentoring program.
So I think Harry was talking about this first question is more likely to pursue a job in economics due to the program. And we're seeing a positive response there with strongly agree and somewhat agree. And then a couple of the other sort of sub-objectives, I guess, also had a similarly positive response. So better understanding possible career paths and better understanding practical applications. Now, I guess taken with the survey response, taken with the administrative data, this looks like a very positive result. The, I guess, thing to mention is that the response rate was 55%. So it's possible that had we had a higher response rate, it might have been a slightly different story. But this was really pleasing for us to see that it had this sort of outcome, at least according to the sort of self-assessment that the students undertook. And in addition to this information that we obtained from the survey, we also asked both the mentors and the mentees to fill in some free text response about what the program meant for them. And I guess there we found both positive and negative responses from the students to start with. So a number of students were highly positive about the program. We heard that 1 or 2 changed their major into economics. Another one was leaving ANU but was enrolling at another university to study economics. A number of other students talked about how they'd really enjoyed chatting with their mentor. They hadn't realised that economists could be so cool, sort of thing. And so it was really eye-opening for them. Other students, however, were less positive. We had one sort of fairly cynical response saying that they'd really just enrolled in the program for their resume and that we should have been more careful with the students that we admitted to the program. And that is one of the lessons that we found. That sort of, I mean, as I mentioned, we didn't particularly have a strenuous admission policy. It was just more a data collection exercise. So if we were to do this again, we'd be looking at how we could raise the barrier so that it was only the genuine students who were interested who would apply. In terms of the mentors, it was also a mixture of positive and negative feedback. A number of mentors mentioned that they'd had trouble engaging with their students, and I think, as indicated with one of the slides around number of meetings between the students, in some cases the mentors weren't able to get in contact with their student mentees at all. In other cases, though, of course, there were more than sort of 4, 5, 6 meetings. So, you know, there were some students that were highly engaged and some mentors that were highly engaged. But we found that the mentors also got a lot out of the program as well. It was, I think, an enjoyable experience for many of them to be talking with the next generation of economists, and they also enjoyed some of the networking events as well. So have we got Harry back, or shall I keep going?
I think keep going.
Okay.
Katie, we've got just a couple of minutes left.
So
I'll
quickly go over then the lessons, or limitations, and then the lessons. I guess in terms of limitations, it was a fairly small sample size. So that meant that we couldn't get the power that we had sort of hoped for setting out to conduct this trial. Also some limitations around the survey and the response rates. But in terms of, I think what is quite interesting is the lessons from the program. And one of those that I mentioned is having a tighter application process, so that we're really targeting those students who want to participate in this. But of course, on the other hand, you know, the part of the aim was to perhaps get people excited about economics who hadn't previously been excited about economics. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. Administration also is important. So there was a lot of a high administration cost associated with the program. So I guess it's a matter of weighing up whether those costs are higher than the potential benefits that we received. Eligibility criteria tricky. I mentioned that. The mentor-student relationship is hard to manufacture, and that's the matching process, which we actually spent a lot of work on, but I think there's still scope to potentially improve that in places. And finally, the networking events were well received. So those were the 3 events that we ran throughout the course of the year. And in fact, it could be a different form of mentoring program that goes forward, just in terms of having those events and for students to have that short exposure to different role models, different career opportunities or options available for economists.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Harry and Katie. And I think you know, there's so many lessons from this mentoring program. And before we did embark on this program, we know there's so many of these sort of things for women, and so we wanted to actually do it right. And Katie and Harry have just done so much work on it, and I think we've got some really sound results of how it may not be there in the numbers, in the actual observations, but I don't know, a p-value of 0.11 or a p-value of 0.6. To me, that they're still quite convincing, I think. So appreciate that. If you want to read a little bit more about it, it's on the Behavioural Economics on Beta's website at Prime Minister and Cabinet. And there's time, if you do have specific questions for Harry and Katie at the end, you can ask those questions as well. But we're now going to move to the panel discussion part of our program. First of all, we're going to hear from Allison Boothen. And Alison, thank you so much for joining us. Alison's actually 10 days out of surgery on her voice box. And I'm going to start by sort of showing some slides that Alison's asked me to show on some of the speaking points that she would like to get across on some of the research. It's really quite pertinent to this discussion. And that's going to preserve Alison's voice for all of your questions, but also to respond, to sort of minimise that response. So Alison's done so much work on looking at educational settings for women and men, but particularly at university and within economics classes. And one of the really quite seminal studies that Alison undertook with her co-authors was an experiment at the University of Essex looking at the effect of single-sex classes on longer-term outcomes, including results at the end of year and also end of degree. The research team randomly allocated incoming students to single-sex or co-ed classes for their introductory to economics course. And then they were actually followed for 3 years after that. And this is obviously published in the Journal of Public Economy. We also, the research team also separately looked at other outcomes like risk and competitive behaviour, where single-sex classes were also found to be significant for women, but not men. And again, these are published results. Moving to the next slide, Di. There's some conjectures around, well, first of all, I guess the results. So when women in all female economics classes at the University of Essex were more likely to gain a higher degree score and also to get a higher classification degree, whereas men were unaffected. And there's a number of conjectures as to why this might be the case, including the stereotype threat where women enrolled in all female classes could be more willing to participate in discussion and feel less pressure when taking exams. There's a related hypothesis around all female group facilitating formation of friendships within a disproportionately male faculty, and that these friendships assist in building comfort and confidence of women so placed. And that may facilitate the formation of work groups or networks and enhancing human capital investment. And if we move to the next slide, there's been a recent study undertaken that Dana Hanna, Alison's co-author, actually presented earlier today at the workshop. A similar designed experiment where it was randomly assigning first-year economics students or microeconomics students in this case into single-sex and co-educational classes, and looking at that main outcome, which is a shorter-term outcome of their scores at the end of semester one. And on average, female students performed better than their male counterparts, but single-sex class actually had no effect. So this is a little bit different to the University of Essex study. Better female performance was attributable to better attendance and completion of assessments. The male tutorial attendance was better in the single-sex classes than in co-ed, which is interesting as well. And the final slide, and we'll hear from Alison after this, the greater heterogeneity of undergraduate students at ANU than at Essex could be explaining this. There was fewer than 8% of ANU students in the experiment doing a straight econ degree. So there's obviously a lot of other degrees doing that first year micro course, whereas around half of Essex students were actually enrolled in the eco degree. And so there's also the timing of the results. So the ANU study is obviously very early and immediate after the micro one course, and the Essex was actually following this cohort out for a longer period of time. So Alison, we might turn to you and hear from you as much as you can at the moment, and really I'd be interested in your views on what actually is it that's happening in these environments that give the better or worse outcomes. And I did read out some of those conjectures, but also ask the question: should we actually separate men and women in classes, or what should we actually design classes differently?
I think that there's insufficient evidence for Australia with regard to that, but I'd also like to relate this back to what Kate was saying about mentoring, and she mentioned the class environment, and the work that I've done with co-authors relates very much to the class environment. And she mentioned that it could be hostile for women. It could be overly competitive, and it could be chilly, she mentioned. And this is what we were trying to get a bit of a handle on in our research. And it was interesting, I found it interesting that in both studies, both the British study and the Australian study, we found that the women were having better behavioural outcomes in terms of attendance and also in terms of doing assignments in both studies. But obviously, we were not able to design our experiment to elicit the reasons for it. All we could do was to do this random allocation and see whether or not there was any difference between the groups, a single sex and a co-ed, and we found in Britain that there was. And so we're still left with the need to design further experiments to work out what the underlying mechanism is. And I was very interested to see on Twitter that I think it was Justin Wolfers and his co-authors have looked at the more hostile environment that women face in seminars, which of course all of us have experienced all through our working lives. And the level of hostility can really be quite remarkable. And I know when I was a student at the LSE that there were very few women, but we formed a little network group of PhD students, and that's what kept us going. And that's sort of like modeling the single sex effect, that having this little group that can keep you going. And this is like the mentoring, but it's peer mentoring rather than the senior figure mentoring. So I can't really answer your question firmly.
Thank you, Alison. I think the work you're doing is obviously uncovering some really interesting results that are going to help us eventually answer these questions and hopefully solve as well. We will get to Justin's research in a moment, but before I do, Wendy, over to you. So it's likely that some of the problems we're seeing in the classroom relate to who's actually in there in the first place. So economics has become quite a homogenous group, especially in the UK. And according to the IFS, boys from private schools are 7 times more likely than girls at state or public schools here to do A-level economics. And then this leads to a much higher probability of young men then going on from private schools into studying economics. I think it was around 70% of economics students actually did A-levels. So there's obviously a really clear pathway there. So how big a problem is this really, and how much do you think it impacts on classroom behaviours? Oh, Wendy, mute.
Yeah, so this is a problem. So just maybe extending the information beyond private schools. So just thinking of state schools. So about in single-sex state schools, about 80% of boys are offered economics at A-level, but less than 50% of girls. So there's a real problem in this country of this very early specialization in subjects, and so that in terms of the pipeline and the diversity of the pipeline, boys are being channeled in through A-level economics, and in a way that girls are not. And one of the big challenges here is to make economics a really attractive subject for students to take at university, much lower down the school, and delinking it from studying A-level economics. So many of us who are teaching in universities in the UK would really welcome our students not having done A-level economics. And they're often, they come in with a kind of much more open perspective on economics. And it's very, very striking when people have done events in schools attracting students who have some interest in doing economics at university, and they ask them what is economics mainly about, and the words that come out of their mouths are well, the biggest word is always money, markets, supply and demand. That's what these students, and these are the ones that have had sufficient interest to go to an event about studying economics, and the orientation towards money, finance is much stronger amongst the boys, and I think quite an interesting result that they found collecting some feedback at these kinds of events is that when they ask what other kind of degrees students are interested in, The only real difference that appears relates to psychology. So the boys at these events are just not interested in psychology as an alternative to economics. The girls are. And I think that's actually come through in some results in the US at the latest stage where students are deciding on their majors once they've sampled economics. So, you know, we really have a challenge in relation to the image problem to attract a much more diverse group into studying economics. And what I find really striking is that once we get them there into the first classroom, more or less on the first day, we ask them, what do they think the most pressing problems that economists should be studying are? Then out of their mouths, which are presumably the same mouths that were at the earlier events, they say inequality, climate change, now they say COVID as well. And we've got thousands and thousands of responses from hundreds of universities in dozens of countries around the world. And they always say the same thing. So they think that's what economists should be doing. They should be addressing these problems, even if they think when they were making their decision that that's not what they mainly do. So that's a lot of that is down to us, right, in addressing this image problem and connecting up the dots to make sure that budding or potential economists think that economics is also about what people are really like. And so that's connecting the psychology dot with economics and with what we do as economists.
Thanks, Wendy. It sounds like, I know that there's a RBA study, and I know Leonora will probably talk about that a little bit too, that the Reserve Bank of Australia has done some work on high school students, and we are sort of seeing that disconnect here as well, and I think, you know, the lack of interest, I guess, in economics for female students, but also students from a lower socioeconomic background. Leonora, I will turn to you now, and you know, you've done just sort of back to this idea of behaviour, I suppose, and who's coming into the classroom and what does that classroom look like, particularly at university. And you've looked so much at the role confidence plays in all sorts of outcomes, but, you know, particularly labour market outcomes like the gender pay gap. Do you think that this is actually impacting the success or otherwise of underrepresented groups in economics? And do you think that some students are perhaps a little too confident in the class?
Thanks, Beck, for the question. Yeah, so the question about confidence often centres around confidence in your own ability and the question of whether or not that is a barrier to women not opting for economics. I'd like to refer to the RBA student survey, which was conducted in 2019, and you can read about it on the RBA website. That was the work of Jackie Dwyer, Tanya Livermore and Mike Major. And they surveyed New South Wales high school students to see what exactly did motivate their choices for subjects and what motivated them particularly for economics. And if we think about confidence, that notion of your perceived competency, are you choosing a subject because you think you can do well in it? It did turn up amongst the responses, but other factors also mattered. And for women, for female students, some of those other factors mattered more. And that was an interest in the subject and understanding the relevance and the usefulness of economics. And when you look at the survey data a bit more, it talks about women being motivated by being able to solve real world problems, like Wendy has pointed out there, the issues of inequality, climate change, the future of jobs and technology. So I think collectively we are getting from different sources now, it is pointing towards the need to instead think about how economics delivers itself rather than pointing the blame on the female students for not having faith in their ability. Look, if we are going to talk about confidence, I think we know from a wealth of literature that what is perceived as confidence in one's ability is often a response to the environment that you've grown up in. And so something we think is confidence could be because women are hesitant about putting themselves into an environment which is traditionally male dominated, where it's not socially acceptable for them to be successful. And we had so many great papers from the workshop which talked about that and how it can constrain women from really exploring all their options and rising to their potential. If we are going to look at the issue of overconfidence, yes, I think there are a fair few economists in the field who suffer more from an overconfidence problem, and that's probably what we need to be focusing on. And even the work of our Nobel laureates, Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, if you've read their book, Good Economics for Hard Times, in the opening chapter, they put forward the message that economists should really take a big dose of humility and recognise the limitations of what economics can do and can't do. A recent paper by Heather Sarsens and Gao Zhu, presented at the AEA meetings this year, measured men's overconfidence when talking about their economic policy forecasts and recommendations, and how does that contrast with women's the confidence with which women present their policy forecast. What they found is that on average, men delivered their opinions, asserted their forecasts and their perspectives with more confidence, and what it was being driven by is that they were delivering recommendations and assertions even outside of their own area of speciality and knowledge with the same level of confidence as the areas that they specialised in, whereas women were really confident about their area of expertise, but tempered their confidence when they were asked about something that was outside of their expertise. I think the issue of confidence is a blurry line between behaviours like a dogmatic attitude and communication style that I think not just in economics but in a lot of corporate competitive spaces, it does breed that type of persona. And I think the more absolute and insistent that people think that they're right, and the more homogenous that group is, then you're more likely to have blind spots, you're more likely to come up with perspectives and opinions and solutions that aren't actually considering the full gamut of that confidence with which a lot of economists currently approach their work, and nurturing a more inclusive and a healthy sense of being humble about your limitations, inviting diversity of perspectives is what will improve the profession overall. There's also a parallel that can be drawn within the legal world, where the capacity for judges to dissent and to respect each other's opinion actually is seen to be an asset to that decision-making and deliberation process. So I think that would be nice to nurture a greater sense of respect for diversity of opinion within economics as well, and that could help to tone down that sense of dogmatism. And finally, if you were going to talk about confidence, I think what we should be aiming towards is talking about making sure that our students and all cohorts of our profession have a sense of confidence, reassurance, affirmation that they belong to this profession, that they will be respected, that they will have fair and unencumbered opportunities. I think that's the sense of
that is a perfect segue into the next. Thank you so much, Leonora. That's a perfect segue into my next question, which is for Justin. And we have seen some pretty ordinary behaviours, and you've actually measured it, Justin. We heard what Alison had to say about it in the opening. You've just got new research out with which is really actually quite extraordinary. It doesn't surprise us, I don't think. So women. This is kind of looking at who's presenting in seminars and how much they're interrupted. So women face 9 to 12% more interruptions. That's 9 to 12% more interruptions than men. And this just adds to a list, I think a growing list of barriers for women in the economics profession. Is there something about economics that actually draws in particular personality types and behaviours, and what's the solution?
Well, I thought hearing Alison's first-person lived experience was really powerful, and our study basically says not only is it true of your life, Alison, it's true of the lives of many female economists. It's not just that they're interrupted more often in seminars. The questions are more likely to be hostile. They're more likely to be patronising. and so on. So, your question, Beck, was why is this in economics? And I guess an economist would say naturally there's selection and there's treatment. Selection effects, we economists think we have a lot to say about the world. That's got to require an awfully big ego. And if you actually thought about how bad the culture is across our subfields, it bears that out exactly. The lumbering giants of macroeconomics are also the ones who are most likely to be obnoxious in a seminar. So in many respects, our problems actually look a lot like philosophy, who also consider themselves the intellectual giants of a university. And then there's treatment, which is, we study competition, and there's a real belief within economics of, we study competition, a lot of people then believe we're for it. And what some call oafish behavior, others might call the forces of competition. Now, in terms of what can be done, that in itself gives us the seeds of what might be a useful way of thinking about this. Because we are the market for the behavior of our colleagues. And I can tell you that in my own academic career, I have been, and some may say still are, that oafish bloke who'll showboat a bit in order to get ahead. And I can tell you why I did that. I did that because the career incentives for a young economist are, if you're a little bit noisy and a little bit obnoxious and you make the speaker feel bad, you look like the smart guy and you get ahead. We created those incentives. So as a profession, we have to think about what should we value? And I think this is where the work of the Women in Economics Network is so powerful. And so, Leonora, I tip my hat to the work you're doing, and Beck, I know you were there at the start. This conversation's happening in economics at exactly the same time as the knowledge base about the different gender, race, and class issues are just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And Alison was there early in building that knowledge base. And so I think that the group really has a powerful opportunity. And it's not often we get to change a profession in our lifetimes, but Beck and Leonora, you guys are doing it. And in the broader group as well. I would say to the blokes, or those who are also like me, overconfident and obnoxious, we get to choose our own behavior. And over recent years, I've done some hard thinking and some difficult introspection, and older Justin is not proud of younger Justin, even as he understands that younger Justin was responding to incentives. There's a little bit that we could think about, like, can we better structure our conversations? At the University of Michigan, we now have a rule, no questions in the first 15 minutes. Most audiences already understood you should let someone get their argument out before you critique it. In economics, we had to make it a rule, but I think it's probably going to be a useful rule. Let me stop there.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for being so generous and open about older Justin and younger Justin as well. I think that's, I have been thinking, I'm not sure what the audience is looking like. Actually, I haven't had a look, but often when we're looking at gender equality issues, we get a lot of women involved in the conversation and not as many men. And we really need that to bring, we need men to come into the conversation as well. So let's hope we can do better with changing our behaviours and reflecting, but I think also putting in some standards, I think that obviously helps, and just being a little bit more generous with people and kind, really. I want to now turn to actually how economics is being taught, including what goes into the curriculum. And this is quite important, both in terms of the interests that we started talking about at the beginning of the panel session as well, but also who's actually going to get in the classroom in the end as well, and what's going to bring in those groups that are underrepresented at the moment. And Wendy, you've been doing some amazing work transforming the economics curriculum through the core project, which is now being delivered to more than 125,000 students every year, which is amazing, across 350 universities and 58 countries, I believe. And I'd like to ask you why it's been so successful, and also what role you think the core project will play in actually educating that next generation of economists and hopefully broadening out that talent pool.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here and part of the conversation in Australia. And actually, Australia's been a really big part of the core project, pretty much from the beginning. So we've got really strong engagement right across every state now in Australia. So why do we think it's been successful? Well, I think there are probably a number of reasons. One is that what we are doing is recognizing that there are new problems, really big problems that need to be addressed, and that economics has the tools with which to address them. But we don't just need, it's not just the big questions, it is this combination of the questions and the new economics. And it's the new economics coming out of the information and behavioral revolutions combined with the new empirical economics that come together and mean that we can change the benchmark that students get from teaching them this if you ask them to represent economics, ask your students this, use your hands to represent economics, this is what they say, or they say this, right? Clearing markets, that's the benchmark they get taught. So what we've done in the core project is to shift the benchmark. So we do not start there. We start from problems in the real world, and then we step back from those big problems and bring in the models. And those are the models from the new economics, and the economics that all of us practice in our research. So that's number one, I think, the combination of the new questions and the new economics. The second is that we've been able to mobilize researchers, I think to quite an extraordinary degree around the world, to contribute their time on a voluntary basis. So everything that, all the content that's put into the core project is uncompensated. Okay, so people do it because they want to change what economics does, and they want to try and bring in these underrepresented groups by showing what economics can do. So we're building a community. And the third thing is that we have, somehow through luck, but anyway, we've ended up kind of getting best-in-class interactive online teaching materials, which is of course free, but also the interactive character of all of our materials, and it's really been put to the COVID test over the last year. So people are able to teach using core, just stepping away from giving lectures, guiding, the students can be guided through the materials themselves, doing all the interactive activities and brought together in live sessions. So, under the pressure of the circumstances, COVID has tested both the content and the method of core. So I think that it's kind of, if this was a stress test, then I guess we've done pretty well. So they're the aspects, I think, that have made it successful. And it's really not to diminish the engagement of researchers, okay? Seeing that they can bring their research into the very first classroom. And we have students doing research from day one when they're using core.
Thanks, Wendy. It's really impressive content, and I've been drawing from it actually quite a lot. I'm really impressive to see the responsiveness with all of this, the COVID content as well from the core project. But that building a community, obviously, that's hugely important. And I'm really like the way sort of starting with the issues and then bringing in the principles or the theories, because that does engage, I think, a different audience. Justin, I'm going to turn to you now because from what I've seen, I've actually been listening to yours and Betsy's Think Like an Economist podcast as well. So changing the way economics is taught, I know it's something you're passionate about, and you've been doing a lot of work in this area. You've just brought out a new Principles of Economics textbooks as well. So what do you think we're doing right, and what is it we're getting wrong? Are we focusing too much on proofs and too little on real world problems? We have had a number of commentators sort of say that economics has become a branch of mathematics. I'm keen to hear your views on this.
Yeah, so this is a domain where Wendy and I are actually friendly competitors. She's got her approach to teaching econ. I've got my own, joint with my favorite female economist, who's not you, Beck, it's Becky Stevenson. So, you know, Wendy talked a lot about the what, and I think she's exactly right. We're all post-Beckerian economists, and I think I quite intentionally begin my first sentence of the first lecture of first year is economics is not about money. And that immediately broadens the lens into a way that's much more inclusive. It's also intellectually more coherent because it's the way each of us on this call thinks about economics as well. We can teach more honestly. So Wendy did a great job talking about the what. Let me talk a little more about the how. How should we teach economics? You know, there's this, from How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's this observation. When you first look at a photo, who do you focus on? And most people first focus on themselves and then look at everyone else. And there's a broader teaching lesson there, which is we look for ourselves in what we read, and our stories and our narratives are the scaffolding on which we build knowledge and understanding. And so it's worth contrasting, I think, how many of our poorer, weaker teaching colleagues teach, which is many think, I'm an economist, I'm here to teach economists because I'm teaching economics. I know the US numbers, I don't know the Australian numbers here, but in the US, for every 1,000 students in your introductory economics class, precisely one becomes a professional economist. Among US economics majors, economist is the 16th most popular occupation, and that's only because economists are in the same group as market researchers. So we need to change our perspective on who's there. By the way, that was Betsy Stevenson and the young Matilda Wolfers, who may grow up to become an economist.
I'm sure they will.
Yes. So we've got to change our view of who's there. The other thing is people need to see their own lives reflected. So Betsy Stevenson and Hannah Zlotnick had a very nice piece where they went through introductory economics textbooks and they simply counted how often were the people featured men versus women. And so of the business leaders featured in introductory economics textbooks, 94% are men, 93% of the policymakers, 92% of the economists. And so half our students aren't seeing themselves on the page. I will add there was an exception to this, which is the Stevenson and Wolfers textbook actually weighs in at 50.7% female, which is quite different. There's also, I just thought this is fabulous. There's a student who had a tirade on Twitter, and I just thought it was so wonderful. I just want to share it with you. She said, today I was working on a problem set for econometrics with a friend. The class is basically for econ majors, and we immediately noticed a pattern in the textbook problems. One assumed we knew how to play golf. Another assumed we knew how mutual funds work. We realized we knew how to do the math needed for the problems, but having to Google how these things work was hard work. What is a slick golf green? How do mutual funds work? What does an economics textbook for a class required tell students about what economics majors look like when all the questions are about golf and CEOs and mutual funds? Are students going to feel isolated? And so I think we really want to make sure that we represent the broad totality of our students, not just in gender and race and class. Socioeconomic status is a big issue here, but also what their future aspirations are, because the reality is, disappointing reality, they don't want to grow up to be us. They want to learn our tools so they can grow up to be better versions of them. And so we want to meet them there.
Thanks so much, Justin. Leonora, I'm going to turn to you and ask about your teaching, which I know you've been just working incredibly hard on, especially over COVID. I know everybody has been doing, working overtime, really, especially in the university sector. But how has your approach to course design and delivery, or even the conduct of lessons, been influenced by differences in the way that women and men are attracted to economics, or people of more diverse backgrounds?
Thanks, Beck. Yes, it's true that we have revised our first year macroeconomics course at RMIT, following a lot of the principles that Justin and Wendy and Alison have described. In answer to your question, Beck, I would say that the changes are not overtly based on gender. It's based on principles of good teaching. And in the past, a lot of economics has just been taught really badly and really narrowly. And Justin's examples demonstrate that. The aim is to be more inclusive, that sense of belonging, and that activates that intrinsic motivation to want to know more. And it's important we're not just talking about gender, but we are also talking about individuals who identify beyond the binary definition of gender, students from underrepresented backgrounds in terms of socioeconomic class, cultural identity. And I think a big one that we don't pay enough attention to is first in family at university. And there's an assumption that you know what a tutorial and a lecture is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with really talking more authentically with our students to break down those hidden barriers that we don't always recognise. In terms of principles for good teaching, and a paper or a case experiment, but a great paper to read here is what Raj Shetty and his team did at Harvard University when they've designed a course there using big data to solve economic and social problems. And they've evaluated the success and the impact of that course. They've found that it has achieved a 50-50 gender balance. It's the highest rated course in the college. And you'll notice that the title of the course is very proactive, using big data to solve economic and social problems. So it ticks so many boxes that we are describing in terms of principles of good teaching. It's problem-oriented, it's action-oriented. You're not just learning the knowledge, you're actually putting it into place. And so that authentic experience and practical experience is really important. And there's the data analytics side of it, which is, a foresight for what's needed in the future. And the paper does break down what are the elements there that really have made it, successful. There's several elements, but the one thing I think I would mention there is that it connects the material to students' own experience, and there is a degree of flexibility and creativity there for students to kind of map out what are the subtopics that I would like to explore. Where can I bring my lived experience of the world into the classroom and identify issues that matter for me? And that is proven to be more impactful, more memorable. It's referred to as more authentic teaching. So students talk about issues that matter for them. In terms of how do you bring that diversity into the classroom, if there's one of you who happen to be male or white and you don't bring that demographic diversity, there's so much potential to be innovative in your guest speakers, in the course material, in the talking heads, in the interviews. I don't think there's any excuse at all for not bringing in a huge range of diverse thoughts and perspectives and people to expose your students to. And some of the best conversations I've had are students who are enrolled at first year economics. They may have picked it up as an elective, or they've come from a tradies background and they want to pivot into economics. And I learned so much from them about what it's like to grow up in sort of a working class, proudly a very working class background, and they talk about what skills they need for the future. And I think we have so much to learn from that underrepresented cohort of our own students.
Thanks so much, Leonora. It sounds like you're really breaking down a lot of barriers. I had no idea what a tutorial or a lecture were, the differences between them when I first started university. No concept. And yeah, I think if you're kind of, you've got that sort of information at the start and you're catering to a whole host of different backgrounds and don't have this assumed knowledge about who's in the classroom, that's really going to help who's in that classroom succeed. Alison, speaking of lecturers and tutors and pedagogy in the classroom, and we did have an earlier conversation about this. So obviously it plays a big role in engagement, and there's some amazing teachers in economics, but should we actually be doing more to reward the teaching component of economics in universities? I think Di will bring you off mute.
Okay, I'm off mute now. And I'll move close to the microphone so you can see me. I liked what I heard from all three speakers just now. And I think one of the most important things for teaching is to bring in the real world concerns. And you mentioned climate change and COVID and so on. But I think this also relates to the idea of bringing narrative into teaching, because economics is a very analytical, conceptual way of thinking. but it also relates very well to narrative. And I have to say the best theorists I've ever heard speak, and I'm not a theorist, although I have done some applied theory work, the very best theorists are able to tell a wonderful story about their theory, a story that relates either directly to the real world or has some analogy to the real world. And that by telling the story, you bring people in. It's the sort of basic human instinct of storytelling, and it relates very well to economics, I think. So the other part of your question, should we do more to reward teachers? Well, at the places that I've been in the last few years, I think that 10, 15 years ago, I would have said yes. But now I think the reward structures have been much improved. Teaching is very valuable. There are, I think very important is the teaching evaluation, so people know where they are compared to others in their department. But I also think the promotion procedures at the institutions that I've been at the last two do recognize teaching as a way of getting promoted, and recognize that individuals are different. They can bring a lot to the academic environment, and some of them might have to have less emphasis on research, and they might be brilliant at teaching, and they're not people who want to be lost from the profession. So I would say that, at least going on my own personal experience, that's not a compelling issue now. But I would also like to mention, this relates to Dana's presentation this morning, that in some of her regressions at the back of the paper in the appendix, she controlled for the class teachers with teacher fixed effects, essentially. And there was no difference between the tutorial teachers on the academic score at the end of the first semester, which I found kind of interesting.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you so much. We are sort of going a little bit over time. If you indulge me a little bit, I think we will just extend it a little bit further, probably 5 minutes or so, if everybody's comfortable with that. I do want to have the opportunity to actually ask a few questions from the audience, which I think I'm really interested to hear your responses to this. So I might not get everybody to answer, but I might just sort of mix this up a little bit. And there's a question come in from Danielle Wood, who is the Economic Society of Australia's president. Thank you, Danny, for your question. And this is something that I've been observing actually as well. Has there been any research, or do you have any observations about differences in professional social media use by gender? My anecdotal observations are that male economists seem much more active and combative. I've seen this a lot on Twitter. I think particularly during the COVID time, there was a lot of energy. Justin, as you are the male economist in our group, would you kindly be very keen to hear your thoughts on this one?
I'm here to speak for all men. Daniel, there is a little bit of research showing that men are overrepresented among economists on Twitter relative to women. I'm not aware of any evidence about the tone. What is true is you could tell a glass half empty story that people are sometimes mean to each other. You could tell a glass half full story, which is the social media that economists used prior to Twitter was the economics job market rumors site. And actually, if you find the right people to hang out with, economists on Twitter can occasionally even be a rather charming lot.
Wendy, do you have? I know that you have a sort of a quasi Twitter presence. I'm not sure if you're looking at social media that frequently, but have you noticed that there's a sort of a different tone on social media between economists?
So my aim is to acquire followers with never having sent a single tweet. So that's a different strategy. Yeah, I think that this it's not just Twitter, but I think we should think as well about media presence. So, you know, on the radio, on the TV, who are asked to make comments. And I don't know if there's any systematic evidence, but if you speak with you know, producers of you know, of radio programs, my experience is that they do find it difficult to get women to come on. So they try, they try, but they say that women are much less willing to blather on about things that they don't really know about, and so they're more reticent. They require more time. So when the journalist wants someone to say something, you know, and be on live in, you know, within 20 minutes, women are more likely to say, well, I need more than 20 minutes because I want to have a look at the facts and make sure I've got the right data to hand. That's I think just a tiny illustration of a more general problem that comes back to some of these issues about confidence, showing off, wanting to be present. Yeah, so Justin, sorry.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to turn Wendy's observation into concrete advice, because journalists do complain often. You call a female economist and they'll say, I'm not the best economist on this issue. That's the wrong question. The right question is, am I better on this issue than the schmuck who's going to say yes after I say no? Ask that question, you'll discover you'll say yes a lot more often.
So we've had Lena, I'm going to hand to you, but we've had a lot of actually a lot of work happening within media in Australia to try and actually hear from more female voices. And I think the ones that do it really well actually understand that women are time constrained and that they're not necessarily going to get a response straight away. They're often doing multiple jobs and caring for kids at the same time. And I think they will also, if they're not, you know, absolutely expert or don't have an hour to prep, they're not going to necessarily take that media opportunity. But Leonora, you've been doing actually a lot of media over the last year, responding to COVID. What are your observations on that kind of exposure of women in media?
Well, thanks, Beck, and thanks, Danny, for the question. So the Women in Economics Network has established a media register. So there is no excuse for journalists not to be able to find a female economist. It's true, the fact that women perhaps tend to wish to invest more in their preparation as men who might be more predisposed to just, yeah, I'll do it anyway. And I think the neat thing about the register is that if as a female you don't feel like you can talk about it or you aren't ready, even though we do encourage you to, you know, do it because we need the female voices, you can refer the journalist to another female from the register, right? So it's still going to be a female voice that is at least helping to achieve that gender balanced view and perspective that we need in the media. The ABC in Australia has been very proactive with a 50-50 campaign, making a commitment to make sure we have a diversity of gender voices on economics and business issues. And the other thing I would quickly mention there is that it's very true that when women are in that public space, and this is where the research needs to do more, that digital space, that virtual space is another space where women are more likely to encounter harassment, bullying, overt or discreetly. And so you can start to understand why women might shy away from those opportunities if they've had a negative experience. I'd like to shout out Jen Vick in Victoria is very proactive about building strategies for women to equip themselves for how to handle that online environment.
Thanks, Leonora. Alison, I know you also have a social media presence, and I do want to get your observations on this as well. Did you notice, especially during COVID and the kind of the policy responses, did you notice a kind of a more, I guess, untoward exchange between economists, either in Australia or elsewhere, on social media?
I'm a bit like Wendy, that I actually, well, Wendy doesn't engage with it. I engage with it because I have to, but I can't say that I enjoy it. And I only engage with it when I have something to say or when I want to find out something. And if you pick the right tweets to read, you can find out a lot, but I'm certainly not the person you would ask for opinions about how representative it is or how vile it is. But what I have noticed, and this follows on, I think, from what Leonora was saying, was how confident some of the men that I do know, how confident they are and how much I envy that confidence. You know, I would love to be able to come out and make these assertions. And I think it takes a lot of years of experience to be able to build that up for women. So I haven't really been much help for you there.
I think coming back to this confidence, or this, I guess, I would potentially call it front, but there is that that ability for men, and of course there's often there's going to be less sort of negative responses back if you do display those behaviours, I think, too, as compared to if for women. I think there's some research that shows that as well. I'm conscious of time. We are a little bit over, but there are a couple of students on where they're asking, and I know Justin and Wendy will be able to enter into a nice competition here. They're asking, what textbook should I be looking at as an undergraduate? What sort of resource should I be looking at? So, Wendy, over to you. What should they be looking at? And is it core the whole way through the kind of economics major?
Yeah, so yeah, you should definitely go onto the core website. So I'm sure that will be sent out to you. So, and what you'll find there is a lot of stuff. So the economy is the place to start. So it's called the economy. It's not called economics, because what we want to understand is how the world works, and start there with the economy. There's another couple of things you might find really engaging to start doing stuff. So that's why it's called doing economics. So have a look at doing economics, and you will find yourself very quickly dealing with real data from the world, answering questions, and acquiring skills of data handling and visualization. All of this is free, absolutely free online. And there's a new one called experiencing economics. So this is all about being very active, and you can have a glance at that, and hopefully that will intrigue you to push your teachers to run more experiments in your economics classrooms. There's a lot of stuff there. There's a great simulation on COVID. So if you're interested in understanding the disease transmission process, thinking of the disease transmitting through a network, then click on the COVID network simulation. And you can also look at the economic effects of COVID and its effects on inequality, all through that interactive online simulation. So there's plenty to get started on and to intrigue you there.
Thanks, Wendy. Justin, what should undergraduate economics students be looking at in terms of content?
Well, they don't get to choose their textbook, so I don't need to plug my book. But I think what you want to do is read to reconnect with your love of economics, why you're studying it in the first place. And that's often a story better told by journalists than by economists, sadly. And one of my favorites is Tim Harford. I read every book that he writes, and I recommend them to anyone. And it's a lesson to us economists on how to communicate, and a lesson to students on how interesting economics is. Thanks,
Justin. Alison, advice for students entering into an economics degree? What sort of textbooks or readings or resources should they be looking at to try and, I guess, broaden that knowledge and become enthusiastic about economics?
Well, first of all, I should say that all my teaching's been at the graduate level. And I do think the reason that I entered economics was to do with social welfare. And I have noticed over the last few decades, really, that there's been very little on welfare economics. And it's quite possible for a student to come through an economics degree without fully understanding what welfare economics is and how important that is, and the analytical framework, and its connection actually to philosophy. And that may seem a little abstruse, but I don't think it is. I also think that it connects very directly to poverty, inequality, taxation, the government sector. And these are all really important issues that I think the evidence suggests that women are particularly interested in. And I would urge young students not to lose sight of those issues that may be why they were attracted into economics in the first place. And to make sure they get a textbook that has some welfare economics and labour and experimental in it.
Wendy's giving that one a thumbs up. Thanks so much, Alison. Leonora, I might leave you to give some final words of advice before we close the session today. So over to you.
Thank you, Beck, and thank you to all the other wonderful panelists in this conversation. I think my personal message would be to that next generation: economics needs you. It needs your experience. It needs your uniqueness. It needs your originality. So don't hold back, and be aware there's many other people just like you in the profession. If you would like more inspiration on our WEN website, sorry for the obvious plug here, but if you go to our WEN website, go to resources, we have a list of podcasts talking about contemporary economics, economics in action. I think Justin's podcast is on that link there. And we have stories of economists talking about what motivated them, talking about their work in accessible everyday terms. So please take a look there, and you'll discover there are people there that you can follow in their footsteps and beyond.
Thanks so much, Leonora. And thank you to our amazing panelists, Alison. Thank you so much. Wendy, I know it's early where you are. Appreciate your time. Leonora, thank you. And Justin, thank you as well. Thanks to our amazing audience. This is a wonderful way to finish the Australian Gender Economics Workshop, and it's been a really insightful discussion. And I hope we do take some lessons with us, and that we can actually create a really inclusive next generation of economists. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.